Let me introduce to you this giant cuttlefish, which is a Badger 288, one of the world's biggest rotor excavators. And this is how those machines work. They curl on its wheel parallel to the quarry wall. Giant wheels with ladles scratch at rock and ground, leaving concave wall. And now, look at these photos and pay attention to the tiered structure of the quarries and mines. The rotor excavated tiered cuts are massive. It is a formed structure with right angles when viewed from above. And now I want to show you the mountains, ridges, gorges, canyons, cliffs, in almost uninhabited ways. Often they are named by the people who discovered them. Are all academics and professors of geology and other science nerds too blind to see it? Mountain on the Kola Peninsula. I do not know the name. Mountains on Antarctica that were only discovered in 1820. Antarctica. Here are even the traces of the heavy machines and equipment. Greenland. Watkins Mountains. Look at the scale of the mining. Greenland. The flight from Frankfurt to Los Angeles. Gunbjorn. The highest mountain in Greenland, 3,700 meters. No problem. Almost completely gutted. Svalbard, Norway. Aurora Borealis in the background of quarry waste. Antarctica, Transantarctic Mountains. At the foot, the traces of machines are still visible. Antarctica, Transantarctic Mountains, quarry systems. Pay attention to the background. Mount Kailash, Tibet. The height is 6,638 meters. Have you ever seen in our time heavy mining equipment that's raised to such heights? Goblin Valley State Park, Utah, USA. Gloss Mountain State Park, Oklahoma, USA. Grand Canyon, Arizona, USA. It's just a giant quarry, waste, gutted territory. Millions of tourists think that they are looking at a miracle of the world because they were told so. Quarry, Grand Canyon, Arizona, USA. Nowhere can we find traces of water erosion. Only the shock explosive impacts on the silicon vegetation. Quarry, Rock Spitzberg. Quarry, Grand Canyon. The cut of the stone with a circular saw. Quarry in Australia, Blue Mountains. Blue Mountains from another angle. Blue Mountains, the vertical wall. Compare it with the marble quarry in the Alps. Marble mining in the Alps. Giant quarry, do not know where. This photo is offered as wallpaper on your desktop across the internet. Caprock Canyons State Park, Texas. Again, a national park created from exhausted quarry wastes in the USA. In some quarry wastes where there is a lot of moisture, people do farming. Banao rice terraces. Again, Banao rice terraces. And this is Canyon de Chelly Nation Monument, USA. The saws apparently did tunneling. The so-called Painted Hills in Oregon. Mountains Ravine, South Africa. Orange River and Mountains. Timna National Park in Israel, just a quarry. Quarry, Green Canyon in China. Flooded quarry, Charak Reservoir in Uzbekistan. Flooded quarry, another angle. And this is another so-called cave city of Crimea. And this is a modern quarry where limestone is mined. This photo is made before the revolution of 1917. You can see that from the limestone is accurately cut segments, the bottom of which runs the railway and where a house stands. And now a very important photo of Inkerman Quarry, the name Champagne, made in 1890. You can clearly see cut passageways through the hill, 100 meters in width and 80 meters high. Under the vertical wall we can see small pieces of limestone and limestone crumb that fell off because of working saw machining. In the cut holes we can clearly see houses. Some of these holes are beginning of catacombs, some of which extend for hundreds of kilometers. They conducted a large-scale underground mining of limestone. In the days of the Second World War, in the catacombs were hospitals, warehouses, headquarters, and trucks freely drove in and out of these catacombs. By the way, there are ancient catacombs in any city of the world. Near Odessa, there's a catacomb that is 2,500 kilometers long. Everything they tell us, rocks, canyons, ravines, cliffs, are just nothing more than quarry wastes. And there are very old quarries over there, and many fresh ones. This is a white rock in Belogorsk, near Crimea. It is a limestone quarry. The wall was formed as a result of the cut slope of the hill. Want to see more? Look at this passage from which a huge mass of limestone was taken. They lied to you, and guess what they call it? They call it the Valley, a beautiful wonder of earth. Check this out. This is an old photo from the 19th century. The mound of the vertical walls of limestone chips are not yet overgrown with vegetation. This is an old painting from the year 1855. We can see ancient giant quarry wastes in the background. Are you impressed by the scale of mining in just little Crimea? I want to tell you more. There is no cubic meter of land, probably 100 meters deep over the entire earth, which would not have been in its time mined, milled, masticated, and discarded. It is not a planet, but a giant quarry waste pit, where in the most violent and barbaric way the entire periodic table of Mendeleev is extracted. Our masters are literally devouring our home and turning it into a desert and a scrapyard. Guess what? It appears there are quarries on our planet the size of several countries. For example, in Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and Iran, there is almost no soil in these parts of the country, because a 100-meter layer of soil and all living things on it was removed. It looks like the Ural Sea and the Caspian Sea are just giant flooded quarries. Yes, all areas in the world that is painted yellow on Google Maps are the bottom of quarry wastes. Uzgurt Plateau. In the middle of the picture is a group of cars. If you fill this quarry with a layer of water 1,500 meters high, you will get an analogy of the Sea of Azov. And this is the Sea of Azov, flooded old quarry. The bottom is as smooth as a table on which rotor excavators rolled. The maximum depth is 15 meters. Perhaps thorium was mined here. The edge of the Karakum Desert, the area of which is 350,000 kilometers squared. The impression is that planetary reapers worked here. In reality, Góry, for the rest of the population, Canyon Yangakala, the wonder of the world, in Turkmenistan. In reality, Góry, for the population, Plateau Tozber, Kazakhstan. USA Monument Valley, USA. Previously, this area was several hundred meters high, up to the stumps of the silicon trees in the background. Same Monument Valley, USA. Namibia. The desert is the bottom of a quarry. Egypt. The top layer is scraped out with soil, and all living things on it, also burnt by nuclear blast. Most part of Australia is cut and scraped almost completely. No soil, only red desert left. Australia, Nigeria, desert. The conclusion is deserts are 100% artificial. They emerged as a result of long-term mining activities. Even more, you can easily safely replace the words canyons, gorges, rocks, ravines, plateaus, mountain lake, and just simple lake in your vocabulary to the words quarry, mine, flooded quarry, flooded mine. Krivobor in Russia. Krivobor in a different angle. In the middle of this island, overgrown with bushes, stood a rotary excavator. Kruithavan in Switzerland, obviously the work of a rotary excavator. Siberia, Anabari Quarry. And now look at this. This is a pile of waste rock in Donbass. The height sometimes reaches 300 meters. Inside them are chemical reactions. They burn, and sometimes they even explode when they accumulate excess pressure, and more. Let me introduce to you this pile of waste called Vesuvius in Italy. 1,281 meters high. But science nerds will tell you that this is a volcano because it is burning, even once it exploded. What a story. How people buy into it is beyond me. And now let's look at the biggest pile of waste, called terracons or volcanoes. This is terracon in Fujiyama in Japan. Geologists must be hypnotized in schools while they're students, because why else would they call quarry waste miracle of nature? Like, for example, this cliff in Australia. As you can see, there are no natural rocks, mountains, cliffs, and gorges on this planet. We are on a desert and a giant quarry that we are turning into a scrapyard.
Ladies and gentlemen, no matter how strange things get here, they just get stranger. There's a national monument in Wyoming known as Devil's Tower. Now, this is a rock, a very old rock, and it is the only one of its massive size in the area, surrounded by trees. At first glance, this looks like a mountain, or just a large mass of rock left behind after erosion. Now, this wouldn't seem strange, except for that this rock has a shape that is eerily similar to that of a tree stump. And if you think that's crazy, there are many more of these around the world. So the only question that remains, if a structure like this is an ancient tree stump, then who the hell cut it down? Now, I would say since the last World War, we've been living in an age of revelation. What I mean is, the knowledge about the true world we live in is coming to light. Most of us would agree that the world millions of years ago, maybe even only thousands of years ago, was a very, very different place. And in order for this to make sense, we're going to have to go back pre-flood. Think about this. How bad of a place does the earth have to be in order for God to say, nope, that's it, I'm wiping everything out and starting over from scratch? I mean, what did the angels and men do to this place? And their children, by God, the Nephilim? What do you think they did to this place while they were here? I can only assume that they terraformed our planet into a total wasteland. Now, I'm going to take you through some basic things so that I can build a case for what I'm about to present. First, what is soil? The Earth's soil is made up of unconsolidated minerals and organic matter, mixed with water and gases, compost. It is the layer of skin on the Earth in which vegetation can grow. Are you with me so far? Don't worry, this will all make sense in a moment. Next, we have rock or stone. Now, there are three basic types of rock: igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. Igneous rock is formed by the cooling of magma, either within the earth or on the surface as volcanic rock. This can be formed from several minerals and makes up a great deal of the earth's crust. Sedimentary rock is basically settled minerals deposited as bedding after weathering and erosion. This is normally found in layers. And metamorphic rock is pre-existing rock that has been heated up and compressed, giving the rock new characteristics specific to certain minerals once it cools. Now that is rock basics, which brings us to sand, which is not soil, but granules of rock that have been broken down by the elements, becoming what we know as the deserts, riverbeds, and beaches of the world. So let's look at our deserts. And here's a question you probably never thought of before. Are all the deserts of the earth the product of nature? In other words, we know that these tiny grains of sand in the desert come from small rocks and finally larger rocks. But there seems to be more sand than large rocks, which gives the impression that the desert sand was not left behind by the elements or eroded rock, but dumped there. Now, when I say dumped, I mean that the desert sand is the result of a rapid breakdown. If you look at a geographical map of the world and took all of the continents and pieced them together as one mass of land, then you can see that the major deserts of the world line up to form one large massive desert. Where did this desert come from? Well, let's say that before it was a desert, it was lush green land that was hit by a meteor. And this meteor cracked the landmass into several continents, forming a crater filled with water that we know to be the Gulf of Mexico. The surrounding desert is nothing more than the aftermath of a great explosion from the meteor impacting Earth. This is one possibility, but it can't account for every desert in the world. So, another possibility is that this desert sand was physically dumped by ancient beings. What beings? We don't know, but I'm sure you can guess. You see, a quarry is an open pit or site where minerals, rock, stone, sand, gravel have been excavated or mined using heavy machinery. They are man-made. But what makes them significant is that the quarry walls have a strong resemblance to the mountain ranges and canyons on our planet. What if I told you that the Grand Canyon is not a natural land formation, but that it was dug out? It's just a long hole that was left after massive mining. Now, keep in mind that when you dig a hole, you have to put the dirt somewhere. Could it be that something like a volcano is nothing more than a large burning landfill? Or maybe deserts are nothing more than the dumping ground for quarry waste. Now, The reason I bring all of these things up, the soil, the rocks, the deserts, quarries, is to begin to paint a picture and show that the earth we live in is a deliberately terraformed, gigantic desert wasteland compared to when it started out. And also, that all the soil, compost, and desert sand around the world may be in great part the remains or debris of ancient giant trees. So now that we got all the science crap out the way, let's get into the good stuff. Now here's the theory, plain and simple. Around our planet, there are hundreds of land masses known as mesas. This is an isolated hill with a flat top and very steep sides. And some believe that these mesas are actually ancient giant tree stumps. Why do they believe this? Because they look like giant tree stumps. Now, that's not too hard to believe given the size of the sequoias in California. One in particular, General Sherman, over 2,700 years old with a 25-foot base and 275-foot height. It is one of the oldest living trees in the world. So, even if the oldest tree in the world is over 5,000 years old, then what happened to the older trees? These mesas look like the remains of trees that have been cut down, not to mention the mountains, which look like trees that have been broken off at their base. Now, if you look at something like Devil's Tower, we're talking about a tree that would have been over 19,000 feet tall, and the circumference of its base is a little over a mile long. So, I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. If a giant or alien cut this tree down, what did they do with it? Where are the remains of the machinery or tools it took to cut such a massive tree down? And where's the rest of the tree? What did they use it for? Well, some believe that these gigantic trees were cut down, mined, and burned. So, the remains of those tree trunks and branches make up the rocks and stones we see today. And perhaps the ice caps. Imagine what type of world it must have been when these trees were still alive. I mean, these mountains and mesas do look as if they were grown instead of molded over time. Take a look at the geometrical patterns formed in these rocks, the hexagon. These hexagonal patterns occur in nature and are found all over our planet as the cross-section fibers of these ancient stumps that are everywhere. Giant's Causeway in Ireland. Is this structure carved by the elements or grown by the earth? What about the salt flats of Bolivia? Now, I'm not saying that this is the top of a giant tree stump, but again, we have this geometric pattern throughout the flats, as if someone had laid down tile. Look at Bell Rock in Arizona. Look at how these rocks line up as do the trees in the forest. Russia, Ethiopia, Venezuela, Canada, Italy, Argentina, Australia, Cape Town, Africa, the US. It's not hard to find these tree stumps sitting in plain sight, folks, once you realize that this theory could be a possible reality. Folks, this is a true mystery that I don't know if I want to keep digging into, but I will. So, consider this an introduction into a new area of research, and get excited, as this newfound knowledge brings us just a bit closer to the truth.
A powerful eruption took place in 1966 near the city of Donetsk, Ukraine. An estimated 33,000 cubic meters of molten lava buried an entire village along with its unsuspecting inhabitants alive. But the eruption was not from a volcano. And just a very short quote from a professor, head of a national level university of geology. He said, "A volcano eruption in the most direct sense of the word. The scene around reminded me of the last days of Pompeii. The hill which erupted was not a volcano. It was a spoil tip which actually erupted. Out of the 580 spoil tips in the area, 114 have a molten core, because of the chemical reactions which take place inside of these artificial mountains consisting of the waste product of the mining industry. And the spoil tips not only behave exactly like volcanoes, they also look exactly like volcanoes. So in this documentary, I'm gonna propose to you a new angle, a new perspective from which to see various features of the landscape on Earth, which we automatically call natural, but in reality they may not be completely natural. At least in the sense that most people use the word natural in, meaning without conscious intelligent design or purpose. And just one small side note about the eruption in Donetsk that I just mentioned. Although it took place some half a century ago, it actually appeared in the news and in the newspapers very recently, when it was declassified as a secret information. Probably it was made secret to start with, just because they didn't want the people in the region and in general to know how dangerous actually the spoil tips can be. So amongst the various classifications of the volcanoes, we have a type called cinder cone volcano. Many of the cinder cones are actually big, regularly shaped piles of slag. Yes, that very same slag, like the waste material of the mining industry. So how do we know that all cinder cones are real cinder cones? Maybe some of them are actually spoil tips left from the previous advanced civilizations. Apparently the fact that some of them can erupt is not proof that they are real volcanoes. Occasionally on aerial images we can observe stuff like this. Hills or piles of different composition. If they really popped up from the earth, from below, it would have been expected that they would have the same composition. So later on I'm gonna return to the topic of the suspicious looking hills with few other types, but first I want to show you the images that impressed me most and convinced me that there could be some seed of truth in this hypothesis that many of the landscape features that we call natural are actually very ancient mines. This is in Argentina, of course. It's a natural park officially, as everything else. And this is the photograph that I found really informative. Just look at these long scratches, these lines. Maybe climbers' gear could have left such type of scratches? Do you think that's possible? I'm not sure that's even possible, because look at the sheer scale of everything. This is giant. I don't know how could have human climbers left such very long and actually very thick marks. So I spent a really long time looking at these images, and first of all I thought, well, maybe it is natural after all, because this seems to be grown, cultivated stones. As you can see, these typical spikes, this is how it was grown, farmed. For more details, see my previous videos on growing stones like living creatures. So first of all I thought, yes, this could be a natural erosion, because the softer feeling in between the spikes would erode first. But then if we look more carefully, we don't see harder cones which get exposed by the erosion, but we see actually round drills. Here you can see my point more clearly. This edge here is also very suspicious, as if some sort of a drill was pushing the stone away. Was it melting it as it was drilling to form such an edge? And in addition, at this very site in Argentina, we have these high, flat walls. And this doesn't seem to follow the natural pattern by which this stone should erode. This is how this stone naturally erodes. It exposes the spikes. So the overall impression here is that this was an artificially cut wall at some point. And we have the same situation with modern mining. The wall is cut, and below it there is a perfectly flat surface for the machinery to move on. So this national natural park may turn out to be a very, very interesting place. If somebody from Argentina is watching, maybe they can go and scout how is it and maybe send better images. This is at a different location and again shows the natural erosion pattern. The softer stuff between the stems of the mushrooms falls apart first, while the stems of the stone mushrooms remain stronger. And then the other image which really caught my attention was this one. I believe it's in America. So we have a perfectly flat wall which has eroded. Yeah, those holes on the sides, that's typical erosion by the elements. But how did this wall end up so smooth? And it doesn't seem to be just a small patch of it. Both sides of the alleged canyon are precisely cut like this. Yes, this looks like natural erosion, but about this I'm really not sure. It's like polished, and at places it's even darker, reaching even black, like Petra, by the way. Again, we have a wall of darker color, which seems to be cut before the fancy carvings. Again at Petra, cutting very high walls. Again with excellent precision. I'm gonna return to Petra later on in the video. There is so much material, it's sometimes difficult to structure the sequence of the presentation. So we're back at the American Canyon. I'm sure that the penguins already have a very entertaining story to tell us. How a river was cutting this canyon for millions of years, and it will sound very scientific because they will know all the millions of years with great precision, and with great authority will link it to other events which are equally imaginative. But the point is, rivers don't cut such precise walls, just perfectly vertical. And particularly suspicious I find those rivers which go across mountains, mountain ranges. How could they have cut through the mountain range? That would be a barrier for them to start with. I mean, how would they climb up there initially to start with their million years long erosion idea? But on the other hand, if a river finds a canyon which is already cut as a part of mining, yes, the river will be very happy to flow through it. And now these are images of actual quarries of our civilization. Decide for yourself if the American Canyon that I just showed you is more similar to these images or more similar to riverbanks. Again, notice where the lady is sitting. That cavity is really a product of the erosion caused by the elements. But the rest of the wall doesn't look like that at all. Now this is a bit of an interesting picture. Yes, the boulder on the back, that could have split naturally. Maybe. But what about these cute round marks on the purple wall? That's kind of interesting. Looks a bit like a tool mark. Now what happens very often during the so-called open cast mining, you put a monster in the middle and it tears up the earth around in a circle, pretty much like an amphitheater. Now I would like to show you a few interesting amphitheaters from Antarctica. So of course every penguin will swear to that this is completely natural, but I stared at this image very long time, and certain questions started arising in my mind in relation to penguins and amphitheaters. Now let's have a close look at this couple of amphitheaters here. So officially the winds were blowing, drops of water were falling, and the ostriches were singing as well, and all this accompanied by temperature fluctuations, and so appeared an amphitheater in the solid rock. If it was only one and it was so regularly shaped, I could imagine it. But with so many of them and all of them so regular, I have difficulty imagining it. But let's assume it's true. But then I'm asking myself, why is this edge so sharp? Was it some sort of micro winds, so to say? Was there a microclimate only inside at this particular spot where the amphitheater is? Cutting this amphitheater and the next one so precisely, and when they met they formed this very sharp and precise edge. Is it even possible to have so tiny microclimates? Such a small space, so that you have local winds which blow with such precision at a precise angle, and then a few meters away you have the next set of special winds which shape this sharp edge. No, it's not the winds, nor is the specific angle at which the sunlight falls on the rocks, because all the amphitheaters around, I see them having such precise edges at different angles. I don't know, snowfall, that also seems to be pretty much the same in the area, that wouldn't form such sharp edges. The point I'm making is that the force or the thing which formed this amphitheaters really seemed to have been in the center and working with precision. If you can think of any force of the elements that could do that, please let me know on the forum, because I could not imagine any scenario in which the so-called natural elements could produce such an effect. Whatever alleged erosion would have caused the amphitheaters themselves, at least should have smoothened that sharp edge. And two more images of the same region. Again, we have a clever river that cut vertical walls and then made a completely flat bed. And yet another image at which I really looked a long time. Now, the author of the blog where I found it commented on it. Look, here we have even the tracks of the vehicles which were servicing the mine. I thought, wow, that's a bit brave to say. But if we look carefully, it may turn out to be true after all. First of all, if you notice, they kind of go down and then a little bit up in this area, maybe. Another point is that they start from the foot of the rock wall. They don't come from the right side where it seems the valley continues, and that would be the natural direction to follow if these were lines left by the flowing water from the melting ice. In addition, here they seem to really cross each other, which shouldn't have been the case if these lines were left by water flow. So I agree that it is possible, maybe these are vehicle tracks indeed, but not necessarily connected to mining, possibly connected to mining, but on the other hand, it seems that there is a lot going on in Antarctica, we don't know even what, so maybe vehicles are going to that slope for some other reason. Our modern vehicles, I mean. This is a modern excavator monster at work. Please note how the bedrock is cut at kind of a right angle, and then keep this in mind as you look at the next couple of images. And officially, of course, all this is natural. So, looking at these modern mines, all they need is time and erosion, and they can obtain the prestigious status of wonders of nature and become glamorously famous as their brothers in America.